Hi, my name is Simon. I'm here to present plugin integrations. And plugin integrations, we're going to cover the environments, the plugins template, the smart client plugins, the management client plugins, and event server plugins. Specifically, we'll be going over the controls you might want to use for your plugins. We'll be talking about what different plugin types there are, how you modify the smart client UI. We'll show some examples of that. We're going to go through briefly management client plugins. You can add 3 items, configuration tabs, stuff like that. And we'll talk about event server plugins and when not to use those. So what's a plugin? A plugin is an extension of the standard XProtect software. It allows you to add your custom code and or your controls to one of our existing XProtect applications, so that you can, for instance, have an alarm that opens a specific window whenever a specific alarm type happens, and shows the source camera. You might use this for something like if an alarm happens on a window, you could open a view of a camera that shows those windows so that you can see who's breaking into your house or whatever might be happening. You might show a view of temperature readouts from a connected thermostat device. You can have all sorts of different extensions to the UI, not to mention extensions to functionality under the hood, depending on what you want to do. We have a number of environments where the plugins may be run. The primary ones are the smart client, management client, and the event server. It's also possible to extend the recording server by creating custom drivers. Those are handled in a separate presentation. I will not be covering them here. And they use a completely different architecture from the plugin environment in the other 3 environments. The advantage of using plugins is the environment will handle the login for you because these applications already log in. It'll handle message communication, both internally in the application and across between applications. And it'll handle data access for you, which will allow you to focus on the plugin functionality that you want to achieve. And it's worth pointing out here that the same plugin assembly may be used across several environments. And in fact, if you need to use message communication, you have to do it that way. So here you see the plugin architecture. As you can see, we have this nice little drawing showing that the plugin environment is your unified interface, so that from the point of view of your application or extension, that it looks like you're interfacing in the same way regardless of which environment you're actually in. So whether you're in the management client, the smart client, or the event server, the interface remains the same. The basic package that provides functionality for this is the VideoOS platform NuGet package, Milestone Systems VideoOS platform, which provides the basic functionality. There are additional NuGet packages available for if you need to use specific features. But for most plugins, you will only need that one. The entry point for any plugin development is the plugins template. We recommend you always use the template. It contains all the classes you'll need, regardless of what type of plugin you're developing. Which means that one of the first things you'll be doing is going through and selecting all the things you don't want to use and remove those. The template is called MIP plugin, and like all of our templates, you'll get it by installing the Visual Studio extension called MIP templates. And I can demonstrate what that looks like. If we open Visual Studio here, you'll notice that once I have written MIP here, it shows the MIP templates. It'll just take a moment. There we go. And then I select the one called MIP plugin. And I click next, and I name it something useful. No, not demo plugin, just demo. fine. And you'll notice that it has created a couple of files and some folders for me. The main entry point that we want to talk about is the definition, the plugin definition file. This one has, if we just quickly run a rebuild here, it'll install the packages so that we don't have all these ugly red squiggly lines. So just take a second. It'll have a grid for every possible type you may need to use. It's worth pointing out here, and it's very important that you remember this, that in Visual Studio templates, we can't have more than 10 separate grids in a file. So for some of these, you will have to generate your own grids and replace. We've used these rather obvious grids to make sure that you don't miss that fact. Because these are obviously not real grids. Other than that, this method has, or this class has an init method that has all of these kinds initialized, all of these different types being prepared for you. And again, just remove whatever you don't need. Another important entry point for plugins is this file, which is called plugin def. That'll be included in the output, and if you don't have that file, your plugin will not be read. It will not be loaded. And here you specify what your assembly is. And it's also possible for you to add here an environment. I'll show you that in a moment when we get over to the plugin samples. It's possible here to add an environment or multiple environments to specify that your plugin should only be loaded in specific environments. Otherwise, it'll be loaded in every environment that has a use for it. So, other than that, let's go quickly through the different folders. Resources is obvious. You should replace these resources with your own as needed. The admin folder contains stuff you may need to use for the management client plugins, such as the item manager, which is what you will use for every kind of item you want to add to the tree in the management client. I'll show you this a little later. There's also various tabs and user controls, but I'll go into more detail with these later. For now, it's enough for you to know that the admin folder contains everything for the management client. Background contains background plugins, as the name implies. I will also be covering those in a little more detail later. And everything in the client folder is for use in the smart client. So this contains stuff like actions, workspace plugins, and whatnot. Again, we will go over that in a little more detail later. So, the video controls are custom controls you can use to create your own plugins in case you need to create any user interface. And you can also use them in a standalone integration. These are found in the videos platform UI controls namespace. And you use these to match your theming and style to the Smart Client theming if you're doing Smart Client plugins. And if you use them in standalone, they will match the default Xprotect theming. We also have a style guide, which I recommend you follow. The link is here in the presentation. The Smart Client offers a bunch of entry points for plugin development. You can create custom view items, custom workspaces, and I'll be demonstrating all of those in just a moment. You can see the whole list here, and there's more. So let me show you some examples of that. If we go over to my Smart Client, you can see I can create custom view items. In this case, it's a very simple view item that just lets me edit a property and put in whatever I want to do. So I can write whatever I want here and it'll be saved on the server. I can also extend the settings dialog, so I can, for instance, create a custom settings panel here, which could have any kind of settings you might like. I can create a custom image viewer, which will allow me to, from my plugin, go to playback mode, for instance, and I could go back to a recording and play independently. This is managed from the plugin, so it's not actually using the Smart Client playback function, so I can have it cycle through a specific playback sequence if I want, or just always show with a delay or whatever you might need. I can also do digital zoom, so I can zoom into a specific point of interest, again controlled by the plugin, and obviously move around, pencil zoom. So all of that can be controlled from a plugin. I can do messaging. So if I go down here, I can say I want to add a message, and I want it to say something specific. I could say hello, and you'll notice that pops up here. Of course, this is controlled from the plugin. I can say it's an error, I can say it's a warning. You'll notice the coloring changes. I could also create a task here and specify as the task completes, I could move this along. I could have custom text out here. So for instance, once it's done, I could write done. And I can even have a button out here with some button text and have any kind of functionality in that. I can also decide that this message should be closable, in which case I can close it. All of this can be controlled from your plugins. I can also create toasts, which allows me to create little pop-ups like this. And I can give those an icon. I can write different counts in them, and I can say they should last for a specific time frame. So for instance, here's a little toast with the number 4 in it. So whatever that can be used to signify, and with a specific icon that I've designed, because obviously this is a very important icon for my application. I can also do toolbar plugins. So I can have toolbars, custom toolbars in the top here, used for whatever I might want to have in them functionality. In this case, these custom view items will change according to what I click on the toolbar. I also have custom toolbars in the view item, so that I can change each view item to whatever color I want. Just for demonstration purposes. Like with all of our samples, none of this has any actual real world use, but is just what you would do to have to show essentially, or it's just to demonstrate how you would implement these things in a real world application. These samples don't actually have a real world application. You can also do custom timelines. As you can see here, we have just different items on the timeline. In order to show those, it's worth pointing out, you have to go into settings, and you have to, in the timeline settings, You have to have additional data and additional markers enabled, both of them. If you just have one of them, you can only show certain kinds. Whoops. So, but all of this is shown in the sample. You can also do custom actions. So, for instance, I could create actions and add those to my, if I go in here, I can create shortcut keys for my custom actions. In this case, we have created a custom action for under window tools, close all windows. And under views, we've created a custom action called, I believe it's under views. No, it isn't. Is it on camera? No. Ah, there it is. It's called camera tools. We have created our open in window and rewind 15 seconds, and we can hook those up to a shortcut key, as you can see I've done here. Control H will open the current window in a or the current view in a separate window. So if I press that shortcut key, you'll notice it pops up. I can also do those with buttons. I can also, if I want to go into setup mode here, I can go in and select camera tools under actions or overlay buttons, and I can drag in, say, open in window and rewind 15 seconds. I can place those here, and I could also place close all windows. So for instance, if I did that, then I clicked this button, that would open a separate window. And then if I go over here and I click close all windows, it'll close it again. And if I just click rewind, it'll go back into playback mode. Notice those buttons do not show up in playback mode, but then if I switch back to live, it's actually independent playback because it opened it separately. So I have to switch my view in order to get back to it, I think. Yes, there we are. And I'm back to actual live mode. I can also do alarms. If I go over here and select an alarm, you'll notice I have a nice little text description here of an alarm. And normally I would just get the view and nothing else. So if I click here and I click you'll notice that there's this nice little description out here with details about the alarm, and of course you can populate this with whatever you want. Again, this is just a sample, it's not actually hooked up to anything real. There's also workspace plugins. We've created our own custom workspace. It's not a terribly useful workspace, it just shows a bunch of cameras in like a diagonal line here. It's not particularly useful, but it's just to demonstrate how. And finally, I want to demonstrate the sensor monitor sample. And for that we need to move over to the management client for just a moment. And as you can see in the lower left hand side here, I have added some items here called controllers and sensors, and each controller can have a number of sensors. So if I select one of my controllers, I can see that it has two associated sensors. Each sensor can have an associated camera and an associated event. And here you can see our standard item picker, and I can choose any test event or whatever other user-defined event I wanted to add to it. And then I can hook that event up to an alarm and have that alarm trigger when I do an action on the sensor from my plugin. And like every other sample, this is hooked up to nothing real, so all of these sensors and controllers are just imaginary. So let's talk a little more about the sensor monitor sample. It demonstrates how you use an event server plugin to integrate with an external service. Like I said, it doesn't actually integrate with anything, but it pretends it does. It also demonstrates authorization for plugin defined items. Only specific users that you define should be allowed to access your items, can access them. It demonstrates how you configure items in the management client, how you do context commands in the smart client map, and also adding the plugin actions to the rules engine. And it also demonstrates translations. In this case, it only actually includes translations to Danish, but it could include translations to whatever language might be relevant. One thing that I want to demonstrate here is if I create a rule in our rules engine, I can create a new rule, and I can go in and say it should perform an action on event, and I can choose the sensor monitor sample here, and I can choose that when a controller goes down, and I can choose only specific controllers or all controllers. So when a controller sends the event controller down, then I want to perform a specific action. And I could, for instance, say I want to, if we can just scroll down to them here, I want to start the controller again. And then use the triggering source so that the controller that went down will be started again. And of course I should have given that a better name than new rule 1, but that's just an example of how you can integrate your plugin items with the rules engine. Let's remove that one again just because I don't want to have it lying around. An important thing to note here is that even though this plugin, which you can see over here, allow me to demonstrate the plugin def for just a moment, you'll notice that it has environments. This is how I mentioned earlier that you can control which environments a plugin should be run in. This one runs in service, which is the event server. It runs in administration, which is the management client. One thing that it doesn't do is run in the smart client, because to do that it would have to have this entry in its environments field, and it doesn't. But interestingly, I can still, over in the smart client, add sensor monitor items to the map. So I can, for instance, go in here and I can say, if we just zoom a little, here you can see I have added a controller to the map. If I go into setup mode, I can here, by selecting the puzzle box icon and dragging that to the map. Why is this not working? There we go. I can choose to add an item from the plugin to the smart map, and then from out here, I can actually interact with those items. So for instance, I could here send an event to power the controller off or to start recording on the associated camera. Even though this isn't loaded, because it loads all that data from the event server, it's still available here, even though the plugin itself has no interaction with the smart client whatsoever. So, management client plugins, let's talk a little more about those. As you just saw, let's ignore that. As you just saw, over in the management client, you can see these items, controllers, and sensors. Those show up here because I have in my plugin defined item managers for them and added those to my plugin items that are loaded runtime. So here, for instance, is the controller item manager. There's also one for sensors. Both of these define an item type and a GUID for that. You can look closer at it if you want. All the samples are available. And then in the sensor monitor definition down here, we define those kinds, a controller kind and a sensor kind, and add them in during initialization. We add those to our kinds that we define. So here are my item nodes and what kinds they are used for, and you can see which item manager manages that particular item node. And then you will notice that these are in a tree because the sensor is owned by a controller, which exactly corresponds to how they show up over here. In addition, we can also create other types of management client plugins. So for instance, if I go back to my management client, I can create what's called an options tab, so that if I go up into tools options and load the options dialog, a custom tab can show up with whatever settings I might want. In this case, as you can see in just a moment, here we go. In this case, all I've added is I've added a single property, and you'll notice that this property corresponds exactly to the property shown over in the smart client. So if I press a different value here and save that, it'll be saved for later and it'll be saved across the system. Another type that I might use is if we go to recording servers and I select the camera. If I just select a camera here, you can see I can do sample tabs for hardware settings with specific settings for this hardware that I've defined. And I can also do that on a device level. Do we have any? I don't actually have any enabled cameras. So I can actually demonstrate that. That's really, there we are. So again, over here you can see I have properties that are specific to that. And similarly, I here have properties that are specific to the hardware. Moving on. So, like I said, you can do those two types of plugins as well. Configuration tabs to both specific devices and specific hardware, and options controls in the tools options dialog. In addition, there is event server plugins. There's three basic kinds of event server plugins. There's background plugins, access control plugins, and transact plugins. Background plugins are the main type that I want to talk about. Those are plugins containing a class extending the background plugin base class. They have to include service, obviously, in their environments in order to be run in the event server. And they can also run as background plugins in the management server or smart client, or management client or smart client if needed. Essentially, you can have a background plugin that does whatever work you might want to do, but it's worth considering if you should do it as a standalone service and put it on a different machine perhaps and just communicate with our servers instead of running it in the instead of running it in the event server. The advantage to doing things as an event server plugin is you don't have to worry about, like I said, all the actual running of it, the logging in and all of that. The disadvantage is that there's certain capabilities that the event server simply does not support. It doesn't support handling video or audio streams or individual frames for that matter, but is very useful for passing event information around, hence the name. So if your plugin is only to keep track of an event happening, it makes a lot of sense to run it in the event server. If you need to actually pass around like frames from a camera, then it makes a whole lot more sense to run it as standalone. And in general, I recommend, or we recommend, that you run it as a standalone service unless you specifically need to run it in the event server. And thank you.